Hey there, folks. Brian Keene here with you. Welcome back to Secret Histories, a video series in which we sit on the floor in my office and we go through my books in the order that they were published. And we talk a little bit about the history of each of them. Today, we're going to go back to January 2009, which is an important year, not just for me, but for horror fiction in general. And we're going to talk about New Dark Voices 2, which was edited by Brian Keene. I say important because horror fiction had suffered a collapse in the 1990s, which has been covered at length elsewhere on various blogs. Grady Hendrix talks about it in Paperbacks from Hell. I talk about it in the old Hail Satan books, and particularly in End of the Road. My memoir, End of the Road, which we will get to later in this series. My generation of writers came to prominence after that 1990s collapse. We began, most of us, getting published from, let's say, 1997 up to about 2005. That's the generation, often referred to as the sixth wave of modern-day horror writers. Beginning with the Weird Tales era, and then we were sort of the sixth generation. Generation doesn't refer to age. It just refers to when a group of horror writers all kind of hit the scene at the same time. Excuse me. Actually, maybe they refer to us as the fifth wave. I can't remember. It's been a long day. We're the fifth or sixth wave. I don't want to get off in the weeds here. Anyway, 2009 would see the beginning of a second collapse of horror fiction, which would eventually lead to the collapse of the entire mid-list mass market paperbacks for the entire publishing industry. And while the collapse of horror fiction was not my fault, the collapse of the mid-list, I certainly had a hand in it, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. And we'll talk about the reasons why when we get to A Gathering of Crows in this series, which was the last book I published with Leisure Books, a division of Dorchester Publishing. But 2009 was when we started to see trouble on the horizon. Sales began to soften, and it was something that you see repeated throughout the genre's history over and over and over again. Horror gets really popular, and suddenly there are a finite amount of readers, right, with a finite amount of money, but there are more and more authors and more publishers springing up. In 2009, the horror small press was bigger than it had ever been. And I want to delineate here. We're talking, when I say small press, we're not talking about indie publishing, okay? Indie publishing as we know it now is something that really came into its own after the collapse of the mid-list, all right? So we are going to get into that later in the series. We're not going to get into it in this video. When I say small press, I am primarily talking about signed limited edition hardcovers. Back then, there was a huge market for these things. And by 2009, I think if I did my math correctly, there were 36 total publishers doing things like this. But the readers are finite. People didn't have the money for all those. And the market, sales started to soften. Eventually, that part of the market would collapse. At the same time, we had the financial crisis hitting, and that really messed things up here in the States and in the UK. And again, I don't want to get too far ahead of us. We're going to really get into that when we get to A Gathering of Crows, which I'll warn you now is going to be a long video. Of course, we didn't know any of that in January of 2009 because this book had been put together in 2008. It was, as you can guess by New Dark Voices 2, it was the second in this series. I did not edit the first one. These books were patterned after a very popular series called Night Visions, which some of you older folks may remember, and some of you younger ones who are really into paperbacks from hell and the history of the genre will remember Night Visions as well. Each volume was edited by a different person, perhaps Dean Koontz or Robert R. McCammon or Joe R. Lansdale, and they would feature three of their peers. So it was generationally, it was all people who were about the same level of success, but one would edit, the other three would write for it. These were patterned after that for our generation. I served as the editor for this volume, and for my peers, I chose Brett McBean, Nick Mamatas, and Ronald Damian Malfi. Now, if you're saying, I wonder if he knows Ronald Malfi, it's the same guy. Ronald Malfi, of course, now a bestseller. Malfi has had an enormous amount of success these last 5-6 years. He started the same time as I did. Me and him and J.F. Gonzalez, I have very fond memories of us doing signings and going to the Book Expo America at the Javits Center in New York City, and just saw Malfi last month. He and I were talking about a signing we'd done near Washington, D.C. in like 2003. So he's been at this for a long time, long enough that somewhere along the line, he dropped the Damien and just started going by Ronald Malfi. But yeah, used to get published under that name. The book is 3 novellas and an introduction by me. Nick, of course, if y'all know Malfi, you probably also know Nick. His stuff is very different than mine, but he's a dear, dear friend. He's somebody who I respect a lot. And that's not a term that I toss around loosely. I have immense respect for Nick. We, of course, wrote our novel, The Damned Highway, Fear and Loathing in Arkham, together, and we will get to that in time in this series as well. Brett, a little lesser known here in the U.S., more popular in Australia, a great writer. If you are a Richard Lehman fan and you're not reading Brett McBean, you are doing yourself a disservice. Look his stuff up. Fine writer. Wish he was a little more prolific, and I wish his stuff would catch fire a little bit more here in the U.S., but just a great dude. All of these are, these are dear friends who I came up with. And it was so exciting to put this project together. All 4 of us were excited. It was published by Delirium Books as a limited edition signed hardcover. The art was by Mike Bohatch. I forget how many copies there were. It should say on here, right? Except it doesn't. There's the signature sheet. Yeah, 150. Now, what does that tell you? In the last couple of videos, you've noticed that the page count, or the number of copies was drastically higher. Suddenly it's down to 150. That was the first warning sign that the market was starting to soften. You see all those things happening now as well, folks. We're at that inflection point again, where there are too many authors, too many books, too many publishers, this time indie publishers. And then you add self-publishing on top of that. There are not enough readers with not enough money in this economy, and too many books. We are going to see a market correction. Mark my words on that. I am not convinced, however, that it's going to be the wholesale collapse of the horror genre, because horror always does better in times of political and social strife. And we are living in times of political and social strife. While I do see a pretty big market correction on the horizon for 2025, I'm not sure it's going to be a wholesale collapse. And forgive me for saying so, but I think we could probably use a market correction at this point. Anyway, yeah, Delirium did that, and then they did a trade paperback edition. These are long out of print. I don't know if Brett and Nick and Malfi have ever reprinted their novellas from in here. Yeah, Nick's Eliminate the Improbable is in one of his collections, I believe. But I'm not sure about the others. Uh, you can ask them online after you're done watching this video. But yeah, such a treat to work with my friends and get them paid. I have nothing but fond memories of this collection. Um, However, as we head further into 2009 and 2010, the memories are going to become less fond. There is a darkness brewing on the edge of town, and by the end of the year, it has consumed everything. There's one little spark of light left, and we will get to that soon. Thanks for watching, and peace.